And great pleasure right now to have joining us on the Book Talk segment of the program. We're going to talk a little business right now. And, of course, we know businesses are, a lot of them are scrambling to basically sustain themselves. And that's kind of the topic of this book. It's called Creating a Sustainable Organization. We're joined by Peter A. Soyka today from up in the Virginia, Washington, D.C. area. And, Peter, thanks for joining us. How are you?
I'm doing fine, Doug. Thanks for inviting me on the show.
Yeah, good to have a chance to talk to you. We often have folks who write books on business on with us, because obviously business involves anybody who has a job. If you're fortunate enough to have a job, and even if you don't have a job, it's kind of the point, I guess, of your book a little bit. Businesses try to keep going, right, sustaining themselves, and we've seen a lot that have gone out of business that we never think would have, and others are just trying to hang on, right, or change their mode of operations.
Well, right. A major theme of the book is the idea that far from a cost or a burden on business, adopting more environmentally sound and sustainable business practices can actually help companies succeed, generate new revenues by attracting new customers and developing new products and services, controlling risks and costs, improving margins and profits, and attracting and retaining investment capital. So there are really lots of potential wins out there for companies that do this well.
Talk a little bit about your background. I mean, this book it really gets in depth into some real good information as far as how companies can do it, and then you get very specific at points. I guess every business has to kind of take a look at, obviously, sustain themselves, but it's a changing world, isn't it? I mean, it's changed a lot from the last 10 or 15 years of how businesses operate.
It certainly has changed a lot over the last few decades, and to answer your initial question, I've been doing environmental policy and management consulting for about 25 years. And back when I started my career, I had some involvement in actually framing up some of the environmental control regulations that we have in the U.S. and that now more or less take for granted. Back then, it was a very different world. Companies, in some cases, were dragged kicking and screaming into the realization that they did have new expectations being placed on them and that they really needed to do something about some of their pollutant emissions and waste generation, among other issues. Today, we find ourselves in a very different place. Environmentally sound practices, I think, are commonplace and are expected. In addition, the other sorts of expectations that are being applied extend to things like certain social issues, workplace conditions, human rights, diversity, and as well as effective governance practices. So the envelope is expanding, but at the same time, we now have lots of tried and true techniques that companies can use to make the transition smoothly and without having to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, no, you talk in the book as well about regulations, and obviously you need some. I remember back, as I've told you before, I grew up in New York, and at that time, early 70s, mid-70s, pollution was a huge problem, not only in New York, other cities as well, and companies, obviously, that made things. I mean, these big smokestacks you would see, spewing out pollutants, and environment really wasn't as big an issue, at least then, and then the environmental movement kind of kicked in, and the air is much cleaner now, so I guess, in a sense, it's a lot better that way than it had been back then, right, as far as environmental?
Certainly, and the quality of the environment today that we enjoy here in the U.S. is markedly better than it was back when I was growing up in the 70s, and we have our system of laws and regulations to thank for that. They really kind of prodded companies to looking at what they were doing and finding better ways to do it. And I would also note with some interest that contrary to the predictions made by many people, putting in place these new controls did not bankrupt American companies or shut down entire industries. In most cases, companies and the people within them did what they do best. They innovated, they They developed new ways of attacking the problem, and they got it done. And many of our companies are bigger and stronger than they ever were.
Yeah, I think that's a good example. Obviously, government needs to have some kind of oversight. You don't want it to be too involved, and we're kind of going through that now, I guess. You could make the argument that too much regulation is costing more money than it's worth. And you get into the whole greening situation. Can you kind of give a brief overview of your thoughts on the whole greening movement?
Sure. I think that, and I describe this in the book, greening is sort of the latest wave of interest in the environment. Every 10 or 15 years, there's an upswell in within the public in the environment, and I've seen this come and go a couple of different times. The point I make in the book is that greening is well and good. I certainly encourage it. I think it's a great thing, but it's not really sufficiently broad to capture all of the important trends taking shape. And the concept of sustainability is much more sound and robust and includes not only environment or greening, but also important social issues, governance issues, and economic issues. And by taking these on in a comprehensive and integrated way, companies are able to make better decisions and avoid some of the more difficult choices that we would face trying to pick off these issues one by one.
Do you see, Peter, in your research and being in the industry as a consultant and all that, are colleges training managers or business people nowadays to kind of think this way? Because obviously, as we talked before, the whole business model has really changed a lot over the years, but obviously in the last 5 to 10 years, almost 180 degrees, I guess you could say in some instances, of how to run a corporation, right? So I guess the learning side has to be there somewhere, doesn't it?
Well, it does, and I would note with some interest that when I did my graduate work back in the mid-'80s, I went through a program that offered a dual master's in environmental management and business administration. So I had 2 master's degrees, and those programs were few and far between back then.
Right.
I could probably count on the fingers of one hand the number of schools that actually offered that sort of approach. Now it's a very different world, and you're seeing sustainable business programs sprouting up all over the place, both in some of the kind of established centers of academic inquiry and into the sciences and environmental management, but also, interestingly, at many, many business schools across the country. And I couldn't have imagined such a thing even 10 or 15 years ago, but it appears that this is really catching fire, and that schools are now really beginning to focus on training the next generation of business leaders to be aware of and capable of managing some of these important sustainability issues.
Obviously, we have different types of listeners that are on, listen to our program, Peter. Not all are running corporations, but what do you hope that maybe the average person, regular 8 to 5 job in a corporation, what can they get out of this book that might be beneficial to them?
Well, I appreciate your asking that question. I think that there's really a lot to be found in the book for somebody that is not immersed in sustainability or environmental issues, or may not have any direct responsibility for them in their own organization. I think it provides an unusual or even a unique resource for somebody that's relatively new to the field, and it provides in one place some, I think, pretty in-depth material on environmental protection, emerging stakeholder expectations, and effective proven management approaches that can be taken. And with that, people, I think, can bring a much more informed and thoughtful perspective to some of these issues and identify ways in which they can contribute to their own organization's success, both in sustainability performance and in business performance and bottom line results. That at least was my hope in writing it.
Yeah, well, I had a chance to read through it, and I think you don't have to be running your own corporation right now to get some good information out of it. It's a changing world, as we kind of discussed a little bit. And the name of the book, again, is called Creating a Sustainable Organization, Approaches for Enhancing Corporate Value Through Sustainability. Peter A. Soyka has been our guest today on the program. And Peter, do you have a website people get a hold of the book, or maybe get a hold of you if they like?
Sure. I've got a company website. It's www.soykaandcompany.com. One word, all spelled out. SOYKAANDCOMPANY.com. And any of your listeners can feel free to contact me if they'd like further information or want to discuss these issues. The book is available from major booksellers online and, in some cases, hardcover at the bookstore, but you can certainly get it from Amazon and BNN online and from the publisher, FT Press.
Great. Peter, appreciate you taking a few minutes today. Important topic that we all are dealing with, and look forward to talking to you again down the road sometime. Thanks for joining us.
Sounds good, Doug. It's been my pleasure.